Well, hey there, squirrels and squirrelettes. Let's read, want to? Chapter 6. Tommy looked rather gingerly at the packet that Tuppence thrust upon him. Is this it? Yes, be careful, don't get it over you. Tommy took a delicate sniff at the packet and replied with energy, No, indeed, what is this frightful stuff? Asphodita, I guess, replied Tuppence. A pinch of that and you will wonder why your boyfriend is no longer attentive, as the advertisements say. Shades of B.O., muttered Tommy. Shortly after that, various incidents occurred. The first was the smell in Mr. Meadows' room. Mr. Meadows, not a complaining man by nature, spoke about it mildly at first, then with increasing firmness. Mrs. Perenna was summoned into conclave. With all the will to resist in the world, she had to admit that there was a smell, a pronounced, unpleasant smell. Perhaps, she suggested, the gas tap of the fire was leaking. Bending down and sniffing dubiously, Tommy remarked that he did not think the smell came from there, nor from under the floor. He thought definitely a dead rat. Mrs. Perenna admitted that she had heard of such things, but she was sure there were no rats at Sans Souci. Perhaps a mouse, though she herself had never seen a mouse. Mr. Meadows said with firmness that he thought the smell indicated at least a rat, not, he added still more firmly, that he was not going to sleep another night in the room until the matter had been seen to. He would ask Mrs. Perenna to change his room. Mrs. Perenna said of course. She had just been about to suggest the same thing. She was afraid that the only room vacant was rather a small one, and unfortunately it had no sea view, but if Mr. Meadows did not mind that, Mr. Meadows did not. His only wish was to get away from the smell. Mrs. Perenna thereupon accompanied him to a small bedroom, the door of which happened to be just opposite the door of Mrs. Blankensop's room, and summoned the adenoidal, semi-idiotic Beatrice to move Mr. Meadows' things. She would, she explained, send for a man to take up the floor and search for the origin of the smell. Matters were settled satisfactorily on this basis. Part 2. The second incident was Mr. Meadows' hay fever. That was what he called it at first. Later he admitted doubtfully that he might just possibly have caught cold. He sneezed a good deal and his eyes ran. If there was a faint, elusive suggestion of raw onion floating in the breeze, in the vicinity of Mr. Meadows' large silk handkerchief, nobody noticed the fact. And indeed a pungent amount of eau de cologne masked the more penetrating odor. Finally, defeated by incessant sneezing and nose-blowing, Mr. Meadows retired to bed for the day. It was on the morning of that day that Mrs. Blankensop received a letter from her son Douglas. So excited and thrilled was Mrs. Blankensop that everybody at Sans Souci heard about it. The letter had not been censored at all, she explained, because fortunately one of Douglas's friends coming on leave had brought it. So for once Douglas had been able to write quite fully. And it just shows, declared Mrs. Blankensop, wagging her head sagely, how little we really know of what is going on. After breakfast she went upstairs to her room, opened the japanned box, and put the letter away. Between the folded pages were some unnoticeable grains of rice powder. She closed the box again, pressing her fingers firmly on its surface. As she left her room she coughed, and from opposite came the sound of a highly histrionic sneeze. Tuppence smiled and proceeded downstairs. She had already made known her intention of going up to London for the day to see her lawyer on some business and to do a little shopping. Now she was given a good send-off by the assembled boarders and entrusted with various commissions, only if you have time, of course. Major Bletchley held himself aloof from this female chatter. He was reading his paper and uttering appropriate comments aloud. Damn swines of Germans. Machine gunning civilian refugees on the roads. Damned brutes. If I were our people. Tuppence left him still outlining what he would do if he were in charge of operations. She made a detour through the garden to ask Betty Sprott what she would like as a present from London. Betty, ecstatically clasping a snail in two hot hands, gurgled appreciatively in response to Tuppence's suggestions. A pussy? A picture book? Some colored chalks to draw with? Betty decided. Betty Dwell. So the colored chalks were noted down on Tuppence's list. As she passed on, meaning to rejoin the drive by the path at the end of the garden, she came unexpectedly upon Carl von Denham. He was standing, leaning on the wall. His hands were clenched, and as Tuppence approached, he turned on her. His usually impassive face convulsed with emotion. Tuppence paused involuntarily and asked, "Is anything the matter?" Yes, everything is the matter." His voice was hoarse and unnatural. "You have a saying here that a thing is neither fish, flesh, fowl, nor good red herring, have you not?" Tuppence nodded. Carl went on bitterly. "That is what I am. It cannot go on. That is what I say. It cannot go on. It would be best, I think, to end everything." "What do you mean?" the young man said. "You have spoken kindly to me. You would, I think, understand. I fled from my own country because of injustice and cruelty. I came here to find freedom. I hated Nazi Germany, but alas, I am still a German. Nothing can alter that." Tuppence murmured, "You may have difficulties, I know. It's not that. I'm German, I tell you, in my heart, in my feeling. Germany is still my country. When I read of German cities bombed, of German soldiers dying, of German airplanes brought down, they are my people who die. When that old fire-eating major reads out from his paper, when he say, 'Those swine,' I'm moved to fury. I cannot bear it." He added quietly, "And so I think it would be best perhaps to end it all. Yes, to end it." Tuppence took hold of him firmly by the arm. "Nonsense," she said robustly. "Of course you feel as you do. Anyone would. But you've got to stick it." Stick it. "I wish they would intern me. It would be easier so." "Yes, probably it would, but in the meantime you're doing useful works, or so I've heard. Useful not only to England, but to humanity. You're working on decontamination problems, aren't you?" His face lit up slightly. Yes, I begin to have much success. A process very simple, easily made and not complicated to apply." "Well," said Tuppence, "that's worth doing. Anything that mitigates suffering is worthwhile, and anything that's constructive and not destructive. Naturally, we've got to call the other side names. They're doing just the same in Germany. Hundreds of Major Bletchleys foaming at the mouth. I hate the Germans myself. The Germans, I say, and feel waves of loathing. But when I think of individual Germans, mothers sitting anxiously waiting for news of their sons, and boys leaving home to fight, and peasants getting in the harvest, and little shopkeepers, and some of the nice kindly German people I know, I feel quite different. I know then that they are just human beings, and that we're all feeling alike. That's the real thing. The other is just the war mask you put on. It's part of war, probably a necessary part, but it's ephemeral. If I said that right or not. As she spoke, she thought, as Tommy had done not long before, of Nurse Cavell's words, "Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred in my heart." That saying of a most truly patriotic woman had always seemed to them both a high watermark of sacrifice. Carl von Denham took her hand and kissed it. He said, "I thank you. What you say is good and true. I will have more fortitude." "Oh dear," thought Tuppence as she walked down the road into the town. "How's very unfortunate that the person I like best in this place should be a German. It makes everything cockeyed." And I'll stop there, and we'll be at part 3. Y'all have a nice evening, or whatever time of day it is when you watch this. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Love y'all. Bye-bye.